Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, a place where you can come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker, and welcome to episode 113, What We Learned and Didn't About Negotiating. So if you've been listening all month, you know we're getting into why healthy negotiating in our relationships is so important to having great relationships. We've been talking about what are some of the things that have been getting in the way of knowing how to negotiate and being able to do it in the moment. Last week, we talked about how the obstacles of self-esteem, boundary, and grief work issues can really make it hard to negotiate well. And today, I want to explore the other reason we may not know how to negotiate well: childhood experiences and what was modeled for us. But before we get down into that, I want to thank all of you for the wonderful feedback about the podcast. I'm so glad that it's helping you think about things and change some things and create a better relationship with you and hopefully with others in your life. So thank you for that. And I'd love to hear what you think and what you would love to hear about in future episodes. What kind of topics, what kind of discussions would you like to hear? What would be most helpful to you? So hit the show notes at ownitpowercast.com, hit the email there, and let me know. I'd love to hear it because we do this podcast for you so that it's helpful and productive for you. So it's really good for me to know what's going on with you right now and what do you need the most support around. So you've heard me say plenty of times that the first 10 years or so of our life are our first classrooms, where we learned how to have relationships with ourselves, good ones or not, how to have healthy relationships with others around us or not, how to negotiate needs, how to have great self-esteem, how to manage conflict in healthy, loving ways, how to solve problems with each other, how to build trust, how to set boundaries, and how to accept someone else's no. All of those things we learned or didn't growing up. First in our family of origin, of course, but also with extended family, kids in the neighborhood we played with, our first teachers, our first coaches, parents' friends who were over a lot and really influenced us, babysitters. All these people, knowing it or not, showed us, modeled for us, and coached us around what was deemed okay and appropriate and normal. Now, there's also more of an outlier situation, hopefully, but there's also situations where nothing was taught, nothing was modeled. There wasn't even any attempt. But most families did attempt to do something. So that's what I want to get into today. And I'm not going to exhaust this by any means, but I want to look at the big items, the big reasons why maybe, even though your family did the best they could with what they had, maybe they didn't pass along some needed things for you to know how to and feel more comfortable negotiating, for asking for what you need without acting out, how to manage conflict in your adult relationships. And if you have kids, how are you managing them and what are you modeling for them? So let's get started here. One of the first things that a lot of people didn't get, and I say that because my assumption with the amount of people I've sat with over the years, make that a research sample, broaden that to the greater population, it's pretty prevalent. Now, of course, people who show up for counseling and coaching often do come with struggles, so I want to factor that in too. But the biggest reason is that they didn't have any good template of good negotiating. And maybe you didn't either. Maybe your parents didn't know how to demonstrate how to have a good discussion in front of you. Maybe they had great ones behind closed doors and they just didn't want to stress you out, so didn't share that. Maybe they didn't show you how to ask for what they needed from each other in a positive and healthy way. Like, did your mom say to your dad or the other partner, hey, would you mind stopping by the store after work today to get some stuff for me? And the other person saying, sure, it may run me a little late. Can you get dinner started? And I'd be happy to do that. See how there were embedded boundaries in there. It was pleasant, it was positive, it was kind, but it was honest. It was emotionally honest. Maybe they didn't know how to share with you how to state their boundaries without acting out and having it become upsetting or toxic or a big awful deal. So therefore, you may have learned that it's not always a good idea to risk confronting someone or saying no or asking for what you needed. Maybe you were never taught how to actually do it because you didn't see it in action. They modeled for you what they were comfortable modeling and what they knew. Remember, your parents went on how they were raised and the influences upon their life growing up. In a lot of families, it wasn't even talked about. Many parents, unless they were raised differently, they weren't able to talk about why being assertive and non-defensive matters. And or they might have given you a mixed message where you weren't allowed to be nasty to your brother, but they were nasty to each other when things got heated. So sometimes we got some crazy mixed up messages too. It's do as I say, not as I do kind of training. So that can also be very confusing. We're not sure which is better and which is healthier. So sometimes there's no template. Like a lot of parents took it behind closed doors because they didn't want to fight in front of the kids, but then the kids got nothing. And the kids knew. You know, my clients always say, intuitively, I knew something wasn't okay because mom and dad weren't talking for 2 days. Well, that's almost worse because it's a little crazy making because then they're wondering, oh my God, are they getting a divorce? They didn't know what was going on. How bad was it? And could it be resolved? So if you're under the illusion that your kids don't know what's going on, know that you're probably wrong. Kids know a lot more than they tell us. And they lay it out with pristine perception. And also, guys, intuitively, they're picking it up anyway, especially the younger they are. We've talked about that, how they're still reliant upon their senses more so than their left brain. So they know something's up. They know it doesn't feel safe. Things need to make sense to feel safe, especially for kids. Maybe you did get a template, and maybe the one you got was that parents fought like mad. Whenever there was conflict, which felt like often enough, it could become awful, and awful is on a continuum, remember? From upsetting and annoying to downright scary and everything in between. Maybe there was yelling, there was name-calling, blaming, sarcasm, throwing things, to even more toxic of threatening, hitting, storming out and thus abandoning. All of that is definitely connected to your anxiety because it set the scenario for you to have fear and maybe even terror and trauma attached to conflict. So of course you're not going to want to do conflict. Because this sets up avoidance or reenactment, I think, of the acting out that your parents did. So when you're upset, you may use avoidance. You don't deal with things. You don't confront, and you can't be confronted. There's lots of emotional dishonesty. Maybe there's some people pleasing that you do. Maybe you allow abuse. Maybe you stuff your feelings and blow up later. Other people don't avoid, they reenact. That means the only way you know how to ask for what you need is by finally blowing up and having a non-productive tantrum, and very little gets resolved in that argument. You have that moment of power when you say what is upsetting you and what's not okay. but it's only a fleeting moment ruined by our acting out behavior. Because if we wanted to be respected and to be listened to, we blow it by being 5. Some families do the crazy making, saying, "Oh, that wasn't a fight, honey. That was just a discussion." Which in and of itself is so crazy making. It's like, wait, weren't they just arguing? Am I nuts? So it creates a growing self-distrust within you. Like, what was really going on? Can I trust what I see and what I hear and what I feel and what I experience? Some families grew up with parents who they themselves were so terrified of conflict or being direct that they were very passive-aggressive. So maybe there weren't a lot of raised voices or slamming fists on the table, but there was a lot of passive-aggressive, nasty behavior. The side comments, the shaming, the guilting, the victimizing, all the other focused behavior. There's no taking personal responsibility. Nothing is said directly with vulnerability and emotional honesty. One partner will say to the other, "Well, it's about time you got home. It's about time you made dinner. Can't you even keep this place clean? You always do that. You never do this," kind of thing. Very passive-aggressive, because the fear is that if they are assertive, it's too vulnerable. And they were taught that that wasn't okay. That when people spoke up, maybe in their growing up, it went very badly. Or they never witnessed people speaking up for themselves, so they didn't know how. So they modeled for you, leak it out sideways, play the victim to get what you need. Get the other person to feel guilty or sorry for you. Get them to be different. Maybe they pouted, they manipulated by twisting things and turning it back on others. Well, look what you do, kind of thing. Again, nothing can be resolved until it's owned, right? So of course, no problem solving really happened. Issues just kept coming up, and they were never really taken care of. Maybe your family camouflaged. The smaller surface issues are matched with a disproportionate emotional response. Rather than admitting to themselves and to the rest of the family what was really going on, like what they were really upset about. It was too scary to talk about dad's drinking. So maybe mom would yell at him for other stupid things, like leaving his dish in the sink or something like that. We displace because it's safer, or so we think. A lot of these families really just, in essence, avoided reality, because when we confront reality, we are in acceptance of benefits and consequences. Each person takes responsibility. There are boundaries. We choose. All this great stuff that we've been talking about here on the podcast, a lot of families didn't know how to do that. So issues were never really addressed. So there wasn't any planning or proactivity. Like often it was very reactive, like someone had to hit the ER before they did anything. But then, once the storm passed, everything was put right back under the rug. Like there was no preventative maintenance. There wasn't any trying to prevent bad things from happening. There wasn't mom and dad taking themselves to counseling in a proactive way, taking responsibility of, if we don't take care of this, it's only going to get worse kind of thing. People who have really good boundaries know the law of proactivity that, if we want better things down the road, or if we want to prevent bad things, we really need to be proactive and sit down and plan and talk about and solve and get help if we need it. And finally, maybe your family questioned your reality. That's a big one. That'll set you up to never ask for what you need. I'm being a little ridiculous, but what if they said, "Oh, that's not such a big deal. What are you worried about? You're too sensitive. Your sister didn't mean that." That's not true. It's not that bad. Why would you want that? Why would you ever need that? Just really questioning in an awful way. You, your thoughts, your feelings, your needs, your boundaries, your fears. So, like we've been talking about all month, I think in order to ask for what we need, we first have to believe ourselves. We have to think that our thoughts and feelings are valid, that what we need is valid, that our hell no is valid, that we get to choose and we have rights in our relationships, and that there is healthy separateness in relationships. A lot of the family stuff I brought up today is all about enmeshment, if you hadn't already noticed. There is no healthy separateness. There is no allowing people to have their own consequences. There is no risking someone walking out in order to say the truth, to set boundaries and say, hey, this isn't okay. For dad to say that mom, if she continued to rage at the kids, he was just going to have to separate, or they need to go to counseling, or whatever. Healthy families have boundaries, and therefore there is trust, and things are taken care of. And is it painful often? Yes. I mean, the whole reason why unhealthy families don't pull the trigger on stuff is because it could really blow things up, and there's going to be pain and loss involved. Negotiating is about risk, healthy risk. It's about respect. It is about problem solving, working together, though separately. So you don't take care of each other's feelings. You don't rescue each other. You stay on your side, but you are also more loving and giving and have more empathy and want the best for the other as well. There's a research article online. It's called The Cost of Growing Up in a Dysfunctional Family. And I thought, as much of this stuff that I have read over the years, I thought this summarized pretty well kind of what we're talking about today. So that link is in the show notes for you if you'd like to check that out. And a lot of this is drawn from materials that I've used over the years too, and I guess that's why it resonated. The first one is, healthy families allow and accept emotional expressions of an individual's character and interests. That's allowed. No one shames you. No one laughs at you. They don't try to change your mind. They don't make you think you can't be a part of this family and be different kind of thing. So there's healthy separateness. And the emotional expressions. People can have their feelings, and that's okay. The other thing is obvious and consistent rules are in the family, and boundaries between individuals are honored. That's the other thing, too. You had to witness growing up that if your sister was in your room stealing your stuff, mom and dad took care of it. Or mom or dad took care of it if you were in a single-parent home. Things got taken care of so you could have trust. That is a big aspect because we're not going to want to bring things up and risk conflict if we don't have trust that things are going to get taken care of. Why bother? Do you know how many people have told me that over the years? They're like, Mary, I just stopped saying stuff to mom. I stopped saying stuff to my best friend, and I stopped bringing it up to my partner because there wasn't any point. I brought it up and I brought it up, but nothing really ever changed. The research shows that they're consistently treating members with respect and build a level of flexibility to meet the individual's needs. So they make room for everybody in the family. That's really important. You need to know that you matter. All family members feel safe and secure. So obviously, there's no fear from emotional, verbal, physical, or sexual abuse. There's that basic level of safety you hear me talk about all the time. Parents provide care for their children, not expecting their children to take their parental responsibilities. Clients always struggle with this when I bring it up because if I say, it looks like you were parentified a little bit, they're like, no, mom and dad, paid the bills and made dinner and all that. I said, but you were mom's emotional spouse. Your parents didn't take care of the relationship. So there's a million subtle ways that we can become parentified emotionally, and maybe not just physically. Responsibilities given are appropriate to the child's age. They're flexible and forgiving to a child's mistakes. So when you were 5, you weren't expected to do things that an 11-year-old would do, like watch your 2-year-old sister kind of thing. And you didn't have to be perfect. Perfectionism is not there. The author says, perfection is unattainable, unrealistic, and besides potentially dull and sterile. I like that. It's great. Perfect is prison. Another resource that I put in the show notes from mentalhelp.net talked about how important it is to understand that anger can be expressed without tempers flaring, quote unquote. The author talks about, the purpose of words is to express feelings and thoughts in a way that are controlled but effective, so they're emotionally honest. So we're not yelling at each other, but maybe we're letting each other know, hey, I'm pissed. What you did really upset me and freaked me out. Now, you're using I statements. What you did upset me. It freaked me out. It makes it hard for me to feel safe around you or to trust you. You're still keeping it about you. But you do have to mention the other person and what they did and didn't do, specifically, not the vague, you always, you never character assassinations, please. That's not fair. That's telling your person that they can't change and they're awful. Instead, when you are specific, like, hey, when you roll in late all the time, it upsets me, you're giving them the meta message that, you're a good person. I just need you to look at this struggle. Because, guys, we all have struggles. As good a people as we are, we always have stuff that we can work on. Healthy families, the author says, can discuss all kinds of feelings, from painful to sad to angry to excited and happy. Fears, disappointments, passions, and other emotionally laden issues can be talked about, she says, in ways that express emotions while protecting the dignity of others in the family. You share your subjective truth. You show empathy to one another. And finally, she says it's really important for kids to be told by both their parents that they are loved. So being able to express our feelings, being able to have our feelings, express our feelings, being able to be taught by your parents to allow your brother to have his feelings too. Not to act out the feelings. There is a big difference between what you feel and what you do. So as you're listening today, hopefully you can look back on your childhood and think about where your family was. Most of us had a good mixed bag of some really great stuff and some ways where your parents or parent really struggled and they did the best with what they had, but they may not have given you everything you needed. They may not have been able to model for you or help you develop ways to express yourself and to ask for what you needed and ways to listen that you needed to be able to negotiate well later on in life. So combined with the episode last week where we talked about how the struggle to have good boundaries and be able to grieve and have good self-esteem, today we're talking about what was taught to you, what was normalized for you, what did you never get taught or receive or be coached on how to do. All of this together can possibly explain kind of where and why and how you struggle. So hopefully you were able to identify some things. You may have already worked on these. You may have already known all this, or you may have been hit upside the head today. So either way, I think the wonderful thing is that we can work on these things. These are changeable. We can get so much better at negotiating. Every day we get up, we can work on becoming better than the day before, and we can watch our relationships get healthier and stronger and happier. So today we talked all about how our families and early experiences shaped us. The next 2 episodes, we're going to talk about, okay, how do we do this? How do we do the healthy? Again, I want to repeat from last week, if you found yourself identifying with any of this childhood stuff, especially if there was any trauma back there, please, please, please sit with a therapist, do the healing work. Then later you can sit with a coach and work on skills. But what we do know is if you listen to your parents fight a lot, that created a low-level PTSD for you. And that is no joke. That has greatly impacted you. It's given you anxiety. It's made it hard for you to feel safe and trust. So I just want to mention that. Sit with someone, identify how bad it was, how it impacted you, and how you can heal. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. May you stay healthy, grounded, self-aware. Hold on to hope. Focus on the great things inside of you this week. Give someone a hug who needs it. Be sure to check the show notes at ownitpowercast.com. If you don't get the newsletter every Tuesday, sign up there. It's the only thing I send you. I don't blow up your email. It's also the place to get any bonus downloads from the episodes. And, send me an email. Let me know. What else would you like us to talk about here on the podcast? Until next week, pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.